Of course, the other thing that we looked at with the data set that you guys, the samples that you sent in, was we actually went back in time. And rather than worrying about what was going on with these dogs down here, kind of the breeds and things, we actually went back and said, all right, what actually separates the dogs from the wolves? So wolves are not dogs. You would not want a wolf living in your house. They tend to be very violent, and they tend to eat people and small children. And so clearly dogs and wolves are different animals. And there's a lot of hypotheses as to why dogs started living with us. They might have been eating our garbage. It's possible they helped us with hunting, or they warned us when other people were coming around. But the question is, can we actually compare dogs to wolves and find out where those differences are? And so what we did is we took, so this is actually, it's plotting a different measurement, but it's the same idea where you have all of the chromosomes across the bottom, and what it's measuring is just the dog-wolf difference. And so we're actually able to do this now because of all this genome sequencing that we've been talking about over the past couple of days. So they could actually get genome sequence from a whole lot of wolves and from a whole lot of dogs, compare their genomes and say, where are they the most different? And so what you can first of all see, as compared to that coat color picture that I showed you earlier in the presentation, is there's a lot of different peaks in here. So there's a lot of different places in the genome where dogs and wolves are different, which you would expect given how different they are. And the one that we're actually going to focus on today is this one right here. So this black peak here, right here, is at a gene called the amylase gene. And the amylase gene is involved in digesting starch. And what they found is that when they looked at the wolves that they'd sequenced and said, okay, what's going on at the amylase gene, the wolves had exactly what you would expect. As I said, you get one copy of your genome from your mother and one copy from your father, so you have 2 copies of each gene in your genome normally. And when they tested 35 different wolves, and every single one of them had 2 copies of the amylase gene, exactly what you'd expect. But when they tested 136 dogs, what they found out was that every single one of them had more than 2 copies and up to 30 different copies of the amylase gene. And when you think about it, why on earth would you duplicate a gene? Well, the more copies of the amylase gene you have, the more, the greater the amount of the amylase protein you can make. And the more protein that you're making, the more starch you can break down. And so basically, the fewer copies you have, you're going to digest starch worse or less efficiently. You may not be able to get as much energy out of the food when you're eating starch. The more copies of the amylase gene you have, the more, the better you're going to be able to digest starch. And probably what happened is that when dogs started living with us, the first thing they needed to do in order to exploit us as a resource is learn how to eat our diets. And so they actually evolved the ability to digest starch much better than wolves can. And interestingly enough, there's other researchers that have looked at the amylase gene in humans and found out that humans compared to chimpanzees have extra copies of the amylase gene, probably for exactly the same reason.